It's time now to talk about digital disruption, including digital transformation, technology and innovation, and the importance of digital equity.
Since the pandemic, we have seen a rapid acceleration in the adoption of digital technologies and remote working, along with ongoing developments in artificial intelligence and other innovation. To get this topic underway, it is my pleasure to welcome Simon Power, the Acting Chief Executive of Westpac New Zealand, who will introduce our next APEC economy leader, Prime Minister Hsien Loong.
Kia ora koutou katoa, warm greetings to everyone wherever you're watching. I'm Simon Power, Acting Chief Executive of Westpac New Zealand. One of the major themes for the APEC CEO Summit is digital disruption. A big challenge for business now is responding to the changing global economy at the same pace that the world has had to change to COVID. The pandemic has accelerated the long-term trend towards people interacting and doing business online. This creates challenges and opportunities for companies, and they'll need to adapt quickly. For business, adaptability has always been the key to surviving and thriving, and we've seen great examples of that in the last 20 months. And with so much change happening, we have a huge opportunity to ensure our economic recovery is a more sustainable and inclusive economic recovery than we have seen in the past. It was fascinating to hear our previous speakers talk about recovery during and post-COVID-19. In times of uncertainty, customers and communities look to businesses to help show the way forward. For a bank, they need to be able to trust us to look after their money. More than ever, they need to be able to trust us to work in their interests to help them reach their goals, like buying a house or starting a business. And they need to be able to trust us to do what's right for them, for New Zealand and the planet. At Westpac, we're collaborating with others to contribute to a sustainable and inclusive recovery. We're supporting projects and organisations that are taking on climate change by providing $10 billion in sustainable finance through lending and bonds by 2025. In the past month, we have inked sustainability-linked loans with 3 of New Zealand's largest companies, Pāmu, Genesis Energy and the Warehouse Group. We're helping individuals take action in their own lives with interest-free loans to make homes more energy efficient. And we're developing products and initiatives to help get more families into home ownership through shared equity schemes, like the one we developed with Tainui, or collaborated on with New Zealand's social housing agency, Kāinga Ora. Of course, to achieve this goal, we need to have a strong global economic recovery and adapt quickly to the post-COVID environment. We need a domestic, regional and global economy that's connected and firing on all cylinders. We have lots of work to do, but it's great to be here working with you all. Today, I'm proud to be introducing the Prime Minister of Singapore, Hsien Loong. With unprecedented changes taking place in the world, we need to talk about how digital innovation will help create new opportunities for a more inclusive, fairer and more sustainable economy and society. We look forward to your thoughts on how we might approach this challenge and what you believe will be the next steps. Please welcome the Prime Minister of Singapore, Hsien Loong.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to the APEC CEO Summit. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the adoption of digital technologies. Virtual meetings like this summit have become the norm. For many of us, Zooming now carries a different meaning. But the digital revolution goes far deeper than the way we communicate with one another. Artificial intelligence, AI, helped Moderna develop the COVID-19 vaccine in record time. Digital tools help governments to manage COVID effectively, such as through contact tracing and vaccine passports. Technology is transforming cross-border trade and payments. The economic potential of the digital economy is huge. Within Southeast Asia alone, the internet economy is projected to triple in size by 2025 to over $300 billion per year. And by then, the annual total ICT spending in the Asia Pacific will exceed $1 trillion. How can we ride on the digital disruption wave to foster economic integration? APEC can play a big role here. It's a key forum for economies to engage in dialogue and to influence trade policies. It has facilitated trade liberalization in goods and services within and across borders. It has improved investment environments and clarified intellectual property rules. APEC should now extend its scope to digitalization, which is the next frontier of trade liberalization. Allow me to make 3 suggestions. First, domestically, we must transform our economies and ready our workers for the digital age. Economies have generally done well in creating analog frameworks and regulations, for example, for land, competition laws, movement of talent. But we need to do more to invest in the digital frameworks of the future. Digital identity, digital payment solutions, data exchange, data authorization and consent. These are some of the foundational elements. Such investments in digital infrastructure will accelerate the industry's digital transformation efforts. Singapore's port is one such example. PSA International has been instrumental in Singapore's economic development. Today, PSA connects Singapore to over 600 ports in 120 economies. PSA was an early adopter of digital technology. Nearly 40 years ago, PSA started PortNet, a network portal, to connect the port with shipping lines, customers, port operators, and hauliers. Progressively, PSA has integrated PortNet with the Singapore Customs TradeNet system to enable seamless data flows between the trade and logistics community and the regulatory authorities. But PSA aims higher than being the world's first paperless port or having a single sign-on portal. PSA is building an internet of logistics. It is layering digital connectivity onto physical connectivity. It is creating digital platforms like Callista for shippers and cargo owners to track shipments more efficiently. It is using the 5G network to optimize reliability and build on Singapore's reputation as a catch-up port. These are just some ways in which Singapore uses technology to stay competitive and to be a trusted and reliable node in the global supply chain and a key player in the maritime ecosystem. Meanwhile, we must help our workers adapt to the digital economy. The digital transformation will be disruptive, especially for less skilled workers and those on the wrong side of the digital divide. Hence, it's crucial for us to invest in our workers, provide them lifelong and continuing education so that they have the skills to compete and can earn a good living. Governments will provide support, but firms need to chip in, and larger firms need to take the lead on reskilling and new skilling. Companies too will need help adapting to the new post-pandemic normal, especially small and mid-sized enterprises, SMEs. SMEs account for 97% of all businesses and employ more than half of the combined workforce in APEC economies. But most SMEs are not as digitally prepared and risk being left behind. APEC economies must help SMEs and their workers make the digital transition. In Singapore, our SMEs' digital transformation journey is still work in progress, but we are moving ahead at good pace. We encourage large companies to work with SMEs to build new digital capabilities that can produce mutually beneficial collaborations. We establish schemes to second researchers to SMEs to help enhance their innovation capabilities. We also invest heavily in getting our workers digitally ready through upgrading programs in the tech sector, which are designed in partnership with the industry. Second, regionally, we must deepen economic integration in the digital domain. Economic integration was the reason APEC was conceived in the first place. APEC members continue to take encouraging steps towards its vision of a free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, through building blocks like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. This started out as a much smaller Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership, the P4, involving Singapore, Brunei, Chile, and New Zealand, which was conceptualized on the sidelines of an APEC leaders meeting. The CPTPP now comprises 11 economies, with several more applying to join. Another major regional trade agreement is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. The RCEP comprises a significant number of APEC members, amounting to 30% of global GDP, and it will enter into force on the 1st of January next year. It's timely to extend this vision of regional economic integration to the digital domain. The CPTPP and the RCEP set out some of the rules to facilitate e-commerce. But focused digital economy agreements carry this further. They provide reference points on the common frameworks and rules for digital trade, including emerging technologies and data innovation. Some APEC members have already concluded such agreements. For example, the Digital Economy Agreement between Singapore and Australia, and the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement amongst Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore. Recently, more APEC economies have expressed interest in the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. This is useful as a possible building block towards a larger regional or global architecture. To enhance our cooperation in the digital economy, APEC members should work towards a regional digital economy agreement or partnership agreement. We can either expand the existing Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, just like how the CPTPP evolved out of the P4, or we can develop a new agreement with an expanded membership. This will be a new dimension of economic integration. It will enable businesses to connect more easily across borders and reach new markets in the digital economy. The ASEAN member economies are taking early steps to do so. We formed the ASEAN Smart Cities Network. We are developing an ASEAN Smart Cities Network online portal where the cities can exchange experiences and share best practices in new growth areas, such as digitalization and the use of ICT. ASEAN's dialogue partners, like Australia, China, Japan, Republic of Korea, Russia, and the US, have also used the ASCN to exchange best practices and share experiences and expertise. All these are useful mechanisms that can be adapted within a broader regional context. My third suggestion is that globally, we need a coherent and concerted response to manage the digital transition. Digital technologies have empowered millions of people, but the gulf of opportunities between digital haves and have-nots has also widened. Global digital standards and cooperation initiatives are important. They will enable more people to participate meaningfully in the digital economy. There are many areas to consider. For example, fair and secure access to data, freer cross-border data flows, addressing misinformation and cyber threats, and strengthening multilateral cooperation to exploit digital technologies for sustainable development. There are many overlapping discussions on digital issues, for example at APEC, at the World Economic Forum, the World Trade Organization, as well as the United Nations and its agencies. It's useful to bring them together in a coherent manner. The global digital architecture should be shaped around a few guiding principles. 1, digital transformation needs to be people-focused. It must improve people's daily lives. 2, all relevant stakeholders need to be involved, including the government, the private sector, and civil society, because it's impossible to draw neat lines between these groups in a digital world. 3, we need to think about setting norms in a multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral way to address the complex challenges of today and tomorrow. 4th, we need to identify a common set of digital development goals to be the basis for global cooperation. Singapore therefore welcomes the UN proposal to establish the Global Digital Compact. This will identify the shared principles for an open, interoperable, and secure digital future for the world. Singapore is ready to support this endeavor. It will be crucial to secure buy-in from a diverse group of stakeholders to carry forward the comprehensive vision. At the same time, we will also need to agree upon and implement effective multilateral rules in cybersecurity. The more digitalized our economies become, the more vulnerable we are to cyber threats, whether it's ransomware, theft of data, or destructive cyber attacks. While each economy must strengthen our own cyber defenses, we also need international ground rules so that the digital world does not become an anarchic space subject only to the law of the jungle. Singapore actively engages the multi-stakeholder community to strengthen cybersecurity cooperation at the UN and other international fora. Our permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Burhan Ghafoor, has been elected as chair of the 5-year UN open-ended working group on security of and the use of ICTs. In our own region, Singapore is hosting the ASEAN-Singapore Cybersecurity Center of Excellence to strengthen regional cyber resilience. Singapore will work closely with the international community towards not just an open and free digital environment, but also a secure and interoperable one. The road ahead is promising and exciting, but it will not be easy. We must recognize and seize the opportunities that digital transformation brings, while also managing the disruptions that it brings. To do that, we will need strong leadership and global cooperation. We must build on existing efforts to establish common frameworks and digital rules. APEC should play a significant role as we strive to ride the digital wave. It has already made some progress digitalizing cross-border trade flows, promoting e-commerce, facilitating flows of digital services, and capturing investment value on innovative digital solutions. But for digital trade to flourish, we must maintain and enhance an open, liberal, inclusive environment. APEC economies can take the lead on this and work with the rest of the world. Ultimately, a digitally inclusive community is a common global responsibility that requires the joint efforts of governments and industry. I hope that business leaders, entrepreneurs, and delegates attending the CEO Summit will continue to champion economic integration and digital transformation to your governments. I look forward to working with all of you on this shared endeavor to build a more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive digital future. Thank you.
Tauke, tērā kōrero ana. Very compelling kōrero there from Prime Minister Loong, from the Prime Minister of Singapore, Julian. And what I picked up on mostly, well, it's the digital disruption. And of course, what does the disruption mean to the likes of my mother's generation who, you know, who struggle still to this day to turn a computer on, to function, to use technologies, digital technologies at the moment. And what he mentioned actually does resonate highly with many of us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is a large portion of the labour workforce. Digital disruption is something that that will disrupt their lives on a daily basis, but it's up to businesses to actually provide the support so that they aren't left behind.
A really important address, I think, from Prime Minister Loong there. Mentioned 3 key points, obviously: transforming the economy, readying the workforce. Quote, workers must be helped to adapt. And you're right, I think businesses can lead and should lead, but governments can support. But upskilling and reskilling vitally important in terms of helping workers to adapt. And the other point I think he made in that particular focus point was around SMEs needing the support. It's really important that they don't get left behind. His second point was on deepening the economic integration into the APEC region, which has been reinforced by others as well. And he mentioned obviously the regional partnerships that have already taken place. P4, the CTPPT, obviously well known by members across the economies, but the need to deepen those relationships and economic agreements. And then the third point, which is a vital one as well, globally coherent response and concentrated and concerted effort to digital transition, and talking about some of the cyber threats obviously as well, but sustainable development mentioned 4 principles: people focused, it must improve people's lives, all stakeholders involved, civil, private, and of course government, norms, multidisciplinary and multi-sectored ways, and then a common set of digital development goals. So as I say, a really important address from Hsien Loong, but one that I think that will resonate widely with others as well. And I think we've got comments on it already.
We do have comments specifically on the digital kōrero there. In the 90s and 2000s, we heard online described as the Wild West. Impossible for governments to intervene, police, regulate. It feels like that attitude is changing. Also, another comment is, it is interesting to think about the risks and opportunities to economies, livelihoods and equal opportunity from the rapid uptake of digital technologies. A comment from Anusha Aluwalia: what are governments doing to close the digital equity gap, predominantly for Indigenous communities? Pātai paitera, ne, Julian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other point that's been brought up in a lot of the comments, actually questions that people have posted on the online comments function, which is really important, and is around the fact that we have so many who are tuned in, so many who are watching and listening, who are CEOs. They have real world experience, resources and knowledge to contribute to the making of a better future, a more sustainable future, and also a duty, I think, with their roles as CEOs to join this essential conversation. So the challenge, I guess, for those of you who are posing questions is, how will you answer some of these questions yourselves, and how will you undertake those challenges in your own roles as well as CEOs, those of you who are participating in APEC Summit 2021. Let's move on now to our next section. Digital transformation has been rapidly accelerated by the pandemic and highlighted the opportunity for digital trade to create a more inclusive and sustainable economy and society.
To delve further into this, our next panel discussion will explore how business across the APEC region has embraced emerging digital technologies to respond to the COVID-19 recovery, and what more can be done to increase international collaboration. Nō reira, kaya koe anō te wā, e Jack.
Kia ora kōrua, thank you very much. Yeah, it's funny, there is a human impulse when it comes to this pandemic to feel less connected than perhaps ever before. But I suppose the mere fact that we are communicating today through digital platforms, we're able to video chat, we're able to use Microsoft Teams in the way that we have all become so accustomed to, shows that in another sense we are perhaps even more connected than ever. Connections across the world, across the APEC region, are seamless in a way we could never have dreamed of just a few years ago. And yes, there are some downsides. Yes, we may all have seen some unflattering camera angles of our colleagues' nostrils over the last couple of years, but there have been some massive benefits from the transformation and explosion in the digital space that we've all witnessed over the last 12 months. For our conversation now, I am joined by 3 very impressive panellists. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to explore their resumes at length. I will try to be succinct. Hafemi Abdul Hadi is the Executive Director of the LVK Group in Brunei Darussalam. Dr. Shiro Armstrong is an Associate Professor at the Australian National University, and Jamie Lin is the President of Taiwan Mobile in Chinese Taipei. Kia ora koutou, thank you very much for being with us. I'm going to start this panel by posing a question to each of you, and Hafemi, perhaps we can begin with your response. In the last year, we have seen a massive acceleration in the use of digital technology and remote working. For you, what have been the greatest impacts of the pandemic in the digital space?
Yeah, Jack, nice to meet you, and thank you. Very honoured to be here on the panel with some very good colleagues and friends. I think in Brunei, us being a very small economy, the digitalization of where Brunei is at has greatly accelerated, especially over the last year. I think that the digital age has brought about an opportunity, but at the same time also understanding the challenges that we face. For our community and for the country, digitalization has also expanded some of the gaps that are in society. And we hope that the closing of the gap is the opportunity that we're taking to really bring up everyone in the community. The biggest challenge that we've had is how do you accelerate that digitalization, especially when you're in a community where the face-to-face is so important in conveying the message, in conveying and making decisions. So that's been a very steep learning curve for us, Jack. And in all honesty, I think a lot in the community have taken this to heart, from the elderly all the way to the little ones. And I think in Brunei, we've been very fortunate that we've had the access that we've been provided, and making sure that the government also has the right framework in place. I think that's been very timely. But really, it's the pedal to the metal, as they say. But that's where we're at the moment, and hopefully we all come out of this crisis much stronger.
I'm looking forward to speaking with you in a minute, Hsien, a little bit more about some of the solutions to perhaps making access to those digital tools a little bit more equitable across the board. I'll go to Dr. Armstrong now. Dr. Armstrong, what do you think have been the greatest impacts of the pandemic in the digital space?
Oh, look, it's really accelerated the digitalization of societies and economies. So many who haven't worked from home before, which is most of us, have gotten used to working from home. Places where even advanced economies like Japan, where fax machines have been prevalent and the rubber stamp that you need instead of your signature, have in fact accelerated the adoption of digital technology. So it has been remarkable. It's improved productivity immensely. The worry I have, though, is as we return to a sort of new normal, and we can contain the health aspects of the coronavirus pandemic and move back into offices, then we're going to lose some of those benefits. People will be back at their desks. Managers will be looking at people's input, judging people on where they are in the office 9 to 5, perhaps longer, instead of judging workers on their output, which I think is a much better way to work, but also we'll get the benefits of less time commuting, less traffic, and the flexibility in work, which I think is really important for our societies. Get more people into the workforce and more flexibilities based on output and more productivity.
I'm just going to pick you up on a little point there before we go to Jamie. It's very intriguing. You talk about the difference between inputs and outputs and time spent working versus time actually achieving something, because not only have we seen an explosion in the number of people working from home over the last 18 months, but we've seen an explosion in technology that monitors those people as they work from home. And do you have concerns in that space, whether it's technology that monitors mouse movements and keyboard inputs, or AI that uses the cameras on people's devices to monitor their work?
Yeah, absolutely, Jack. That is a worry for me. I mean, it just shows a lack of trust between an employer and a worker. And it doesn't do much for productivity. I mean, this is, again, trying to measure input. If you're at your desk for X number of hours, then you must be doing well. I think we need to move beyond that and get better ways of measuring productivity by measuring output, what workers are producing. And that's much more important now, of course. That's, obviously for office work, we're talking about something completely different for frontline workers and others who are in the services industry. So that's another issue.
Jamie, I'll come to you. In the last year, with the digital accelerate or the acceleration in the use of digital technology, what do you think have been the greatest impacts of the pandemic in the digital workspace?
I think I have to agree with Cheryl and Hsien in terms of the pandemic has been accelerating digital transformation. For Taiwan Mobile ourselves, between our around 10,000 employees, we went to almost full work from home situation since the lockdown that happened in Taiwan in May. And so far, we're still more than 65% working from home. And over the past 4 or 5 months, we have been setting record revenue and profits. So that is sort of a case study for Dr. Armstrong. We're not measuring employee inputs, but our outputs have been so good. I don't have to measure their inputs, and I think that has been a great transformation for us. And I think the transformation is here to stay. On top of that, I think this is one case, but through the pandemic, I'm also observing it creating new economic opportunities for the emerging countries. For example, there's one game called Exit Infinity that has become very popular during the pandemic. And every day, there are hundreds of thousands of players in Vietnam and Philippines that are minting the NFTs from the game and selling them to the more affluent players in the West. And it's creating economic opportunities for the displaced people in these countries through the pandemic, and it's creating service exports, and it's making sort of lives better for them. So, and this is something really new, but I think these type of creator economies is also here to stay, and it's also boosted by the pandemic.
Hafimi, what opportunities does the digital revolution present for addressing inequality?
I guess for with regard to the inequality, Jack, again, it's presented this great reset. I think yesterday we were in a session with a different organization, and the reset is from the perspective of the fact that everyone's on the same level at the moment. So if I took logistics for an example, from somebody who really has no employment, they then become runner services, and they can actually build their own, service delivery system out of it. And you're on the same level pretty much as an established logistics company. So that's probably one avenue. The other avenue, obviously, is the ones in terms of inequality. How do you then, we've been able to give more opportunity to a greater portion of the community as opposed to just those that are in established scenes. And if I give you an example, there's more now with NGO services and those related to supporting the frontline workers. And that could be from anyone, from an established restaurant to the single mom who's just cooking from home and just preparing meals. And for me, that's my understanding of how do we bridge that inequality, because the government is actually reaching out more to those who are in the lesser advantaged segments of society and giving them that opportunity to contribute, and at the same time being supported by more established companies to really fit into that service-oriented supply chain that we're seeing on the ground. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, there's two ways to look about it, that digitalization has brought about that opportunity for anyone who's willing to give it a go. But at the same time, also, we're trying to uplift those that have been impacted by COVID, just in their business, in the way they go about doing things, and at the same time, them unearthing their own talents and how do they bring that into the mainstream and becoming a full part of the economy.
Dr. Armstrong, what's the importance of global governance for digital trade?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So we've talked a fair bit about the digital divide within economies, but I think it's also important to think about the digital divide between economies. This is where we have geopolitics and a lack of global governance, meaning there's more protectionism on the rise, and we could have a real fractured global digital economy. And that's not good for productivity, it's not good for supply chains, it's not good for logistics that Hsien spoke about. And that's going to affect living standards. It'll affect the economies that are trying to stay at the technological frontier if they're cut off from other economies, and it'll affect those trying to catch up. So look, we've made a lot of progress through bilateral and regional agreements, digital economy agreement. New Zealand's part of the deeper digital economy partnership agreement, and there are many others. But what we're missing, I think, is a sort of multilateral principles to guide those. There are some, but this is where I think APEC is especially important, because it's non-binding cooperation. It's really getting businesses together with governments, with experts, to discuss these issues and build up those principles, some multilateral principles that's going to help guide a lot of these smaller agreements and build up towards global governance. So we don't have a WTO for digital trade and for managing data. But the hope, I think, is that we move towards that so that we get more predictability, transparency in policies. Economies can maintain their policy choices and options domestically, of course, but you can then import the technologies, and you have access to the technologies and data globally. So I think that's a big priority for us, while we focus, of course, on inclusivity and narrowing that digital divide within economies.
How difficult is it going to be to get consensus within that space?
Very difficult. And with the United States and China locked in strategic competition, it's extremely difficult. But that's where I think it's the smaller and middle powers that are going to be really important to create that understanding and that space for multilateral settlements between the big players. And that's not to mention Europe as well, but just focused on this part of the world where there is a lot of dynamism, there are habits of cooperation. I think this is where the policy priority has to lie. And I say policy priority, but of course business has a pretty important, very important role here in encouraging governments along, pointing out the problems and the deficiencies. And there are technical solutions, there are cooperative solutions to some of these really difficult, sensitive issues.
Jamie, what other challenges exist when it comes to ensuring the digital revolution doesn't leave people behind?
I think it's the #1 switch from education to lifelong learning. So in the old days, we approach education like feeding, right? So we're thinking that we have a group of young people and we need to make sure that they have enough food. But today, I think even if you're graduated from college or master's program, it doesn't guarantee you a lifelong successful career. You have to continue to learn. So we need to switch our mindset from traditional programmed education to empowering our people to have a life that they're always learning and they're always picking up new skills and abilities to win in this ever-changing environment. I think that's #1. #2, I think we have to change this sort of specialization-geared society to a sort of multidisciplinary, encouraging our people to be more multidisciplinary. I think in this accelerating digital world, like I said, new job replacements are going to accelerate, and only by making people multidisciplinary will they do better in sort of this ever-changing job landscape. So I think those two things are the most important things we need to focus on going forward.
Hafimi, what role should public, private, civil sectors play in helping to redefine the commerce and trade landscape for small enterprises and micro enterprises?
I think for definitely in that segment of enterprise, Jack, you're seeing more and more dedication to bringing up the smaller and the micros. In the area of work that I cover in Brunei, we also look at the potential future impact of social enterprise. So, a lot in this segment are made up of the small and the micro. I think where this is one opportunity that we can actually bring it up, and Dr. Hsien mentioned that, how do we get the rules behind it right? How do we get the enabling factors that bring into the whole conversation the small and the micros? I think a lot of us who are in the space with microfinance and even in the whole financial sector is that we want to be able to support the small and the micros, but if you don't give them a voice to table their comments at the same time, then it's a bit difficult. So that's probably one platform that we've been pushing quite hard for, whereby we get the opportunity to interact with small and micros. Secondly is the fact that when you cater platforms or capability delivery, that you really look at how do you bring it within the small and the micro space, because we all understand that the small and the micro is the birthplace of where the entrepreneurial journey will begin. And I think that's more important, ever more so now than it used to be. So this is the segment that we feel the framework has to be in place, the ecosystem has to be strong and strengthened even more to enable these the micros and the smalls to thrive. And I think if you look at the whole approach with ESGs now, that we need to concentrate on having socialization, we have to have a proper approach. And again, going back to what we had mentioned earlier, this is where the great reset happens, that we give them that right entry level support so that they themselves can thrive. So I hope that as we all move forward, in redefining where the economies lie, where the diversification lies, where the inclusion lies, that the conversation back to the smaller micro isn't just an afterthought. It actually drives a lot of where the mainstream programs would be going into, because that will give you that strong foundation when you actually rebuild your economies in a future with COVID.
One thing we haven't focused on is digital security. Dr. Armstrong, with the digital revolution comes significant security concerns regarding data privacy and cybersecurity. What are the key risks that you see in this space, and what can we do to mitigate them?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Well, look, there are a lot of technical issues around that, but I think importantly, a lot of trust has broken down between economies, and the coronavirus pandemic has not helped that. So we've got some pretty big global fractures in global governance. We're having trouble in the G20, for example. But I think this is where a lot of our economies, in fact, all our economies, have common interests and common challenges. We share these challenges. So this is where experience sharing between economies, between business and government and experts, I think that's really important. And again, I come back to the APEC forum, and this is where experience sharing can help. We haven't mentioned the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. That's got a cooperation agenda as well. I know not all APEC members are part of RCEP, but we need to use all these avenues where we can to build confidence and trust between economies. And some of these issues, these these difficult issues that involve a lot of risk and are sensitive, bundling them with positive sum win-win interactions and thinking about how to improve our digital trade will make it a lot easier to handle, I think. So you can't just isolate these problems on their own and deal with them in a zero-sum or negative-sum way. I think that's where you can bundle some of these issues together.
I'm afraid we are out of time. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it. Hafimi Abdul Hadi, Dr. Shiro Armstrong and Jamie Lin.
Kia ora, hoa ngā mihi nui kia koe. Thank you, Jack. And as you say, thanks to your panel as well. Really appreciated some of those thoughts that they have made. You can make comments and indeed express your feedback as well if you want. Just simply provide those to us. And Rorini is going to go through some of those comments and feedback very soon. Look, just wanted to pick up on a couple of points if I can. And it was made right at the top, actually, by Hafimi, who mentioned that in Brunei they've seen tremendous acceleration of change. And I think the point was made at the end again, where that tremendous acceleration of change brings benefits, yes, but it also brings some risks. And a point that she made there, obviously, is that it also exacerbates or increases the gaps that have been exposed pre-COVID-19, the increased disparities between different economies, and of course within different communities within those economies themselves. Dr. Armstrong made a really good point, I think, which resonated with a lot of people after Jack raised a really good question around people getting to Microsoft Teams and all that kind of stuff, but also the point about input versus output, right?
Yes,
about people
people
have gone home. I think you've seen this, right? So people don't have to travel to work as much. They stay home, they work from home. So therefore, they're able to spend a little bit more time focusing on outcomes-focused results.
Absolutely.
And so you've seen that versus, once COVID-19 and we return to normal, whenever that may happen globally, and particularly across the APEC region, but when people go back into the work atmosphere, whether or not we will see the change from work now to people being measured again in terms of their time at the desk or their time tied down in the office, vis-a-vis obviously their work to drive outcomes and outputs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he also raised a good point there about trust. You know, moving forward in a post-COVID-19 pandemic, you know, businesses do need to realise, one, trust is a huge, a huge part of building capability and capacity within any workforce and any economy. And, when we look at digital, the possibilities, the potential of what digital technologies can provide for any economy. You know, trust, it comes down to, are people going to be monitoring every worker, like, okay, did you actually spend 10 hours online doing actual work that's, relevant to the work that you're being paid for?
Can I tell you why I'm laughing?
Why are you laughing,
Because
Julian?
I own my own company, right? And I work from home a lot, and I start measuring myself based on time versus performance.
Really?
Yeah. So, because I'm used to that, right?
It's a habit you need to get out of, Julian?
Well, you see, so I used to be a chief operating officer, right? So I used to be like, in the office, kind of work during lunch and all that kind of stuff. But the other really kind of interesting thing was when I got home into the working from home environment, I was essentially doing the same thing, then realised actually time and maximisation of performance weren't necessarily, that seriously aligned, right? So yes, you spend time, but you've got to focus on outcomes and outputs. And so productivity wasn't necessarily tied, which was revelation for me at the time, wasn't necessarily tied to the time I spent sitting in the chair. So that's something that I think came out of that conversation, which was really kind of interesting for me and something that I'm sure will resonate for a lot of people. But also another point that Hsien made, which I think is a really good point around how do we support people to unearth their own opportunities? So when you have these disparities that exist, how can we give support to those? And she talked about the small and the micro. So how do you give the small and the micro the opportunities to be able to unearth their own opportunities? You heard Jamie talking about workforce development and the need for multidisciplinary approaches to the new working normal, which is to say that we need to develop and upskill workers to be able to do multidisciplined roles in the future of employment, which I think is also really important. And then the other point I think that Dr. Shiro Armstrong raised, which is really important, is yes, there are disparities between economies themselves, right? And he mentioned G20, and that has become obvious recently. But the fact that there is a need to, yes, focus on productivity, but also to be able to focus on those economies that are still trying to play catch up, and that the wider APEC regional approach cannot hamper those who are still playing the catch-up game at the moment, and they have to be an incredible focus for that, and that there should be a WTO for digital structure, and in his view, that this is a big priority, and noting that it will be difficult, particularly when you have those tensions geopolitically. It will be difficult, but it is necessary. So I thought that was a fascinating conversation, actually.
Absolutely. I did too. I agree, Julian.
Bye-bye.
Well, let's quickly move over to some of the comments that are being made online via our platform. Now, one says the need for effective collaboration between business and government is very clear. It's going to be increasingly important to work together to develop adaptive digital frameworks and policies and reinforce consumer trust. Another comment, for the business community, being digitally capable and engaged has gone from a nice to have to a must-have across all the sectors. One other comment, and this is from Jason Sherrington, tēnā koe. One of the critical pathways for digital acceleration is people. Tangata. And we need to quickly resolve the challenges of a scarce skills market exacerbated by immigration issues.
Very good. And another comment I just saw now. And again, thank you very much for these comments. We really do appreciate them and encourage you to keep sending them in to us if you can. One here, short but very concise and to the point, which says accelerated adoption, access for all and sustainability over time, as he changes cameras. I'll say it again. Accelerated adoption, access for all and sustainability over time. Thank you for your comments. Again, we really do appreciate them coming in. We've got a whole bunch of comments that we haven't been able to get to, but we have taken note of them. We will try and raise those as we go throughout the day. And I think we're moving now to our next part. I'm going to hand over to you, Audini.
Thank you very much, Julian.
You're welcome. Seamless transition.
Raro kauiho. Coming up a little later on, we will be continuing the discussions around digital, with the digital future post-COVID-19 and, of course, during this current pandemic that we're all facing across the globe. But we will be hearing e te iwi from award-winning lawyer Amal Clooney, who will speak to us about human rights in the digital age. But before that, Anea no Amaya. I know this next session holds a special place in your virtual heart, Maya. I'll hand it over to you for the introduction of our next keynote speaker.
It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, coming to us all the way from Canada. Amber Mack is a leader in digital innovation, including the future of work, commerce, and emerging technologies. I was lucky enough to chat with Amber before the summit. She is an entrepreneur, best-selling author, award-winning podcast host, blogger, keynote speaker, and a TV and radio host. I'm really looking forward to her address today, as she will be speaking on a topic that is close to my heart, relentless adaptation, and how we are seeing an acceleration of technology that will change the future forever. Technology just like me. Please welcome Amber Mack.
Right now, the spotlight is shining bright on the world's top technology companies, honing in on their many missteps and calling them out for their oversized impact on humanity, democracy, and trust. We have tech leaders racing to space, comparing the size of their rockets, and social networking giants designing complex algorithmic ads to keep our kids in their pipeline. As leaders gather here today, it might feel like there's a thick line between what you do and what big tech does. But as you embrace a tech-first strategy, which is an obvious path to succeed in today's digital world, that line will soon begin to blur. After all, every leading organization is on their way to becoming a technology business, or maybe you already are. So it's only fair to say that the same challenges that plague big tech will come knocking on your door. These challenges will be well discussed at today's APEC CEO Summit, including equity, transparency, sustainability, and perhaps most important, trust. When you open the door to the digital disruption opportunity, there's a lot more than digital disruption that comes inside. You now have the power to create jobs and kill jobs, collect data and protect data, save the planet and connect its people. The digital disruption opportunity isn't new. In normal times, we were just too slow to make it a priority. However, over the past year and a half, the top organizations in the world have successfully put their best tech minds to work. And as a result, we're witnessing rapid change and relentless adaptation, extraordinary progress in chaotic times. Let's take a minute to look at some of this work. Innovative launches and pilot projects that we've seen ramp up all around the world. In Canada, tiny pink robots are delivering restaurant meals. This little machine is named Jeffrey after Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI. In Singapore, a four-legged robot called Spot patrols parks to make sure visitors maintain social distancing. Thanks to a fitted camera, the robot also records how many visitors spend time in these public spaces. In New Zealand, NFC tags work alongside the government's COVID Tracer app to automatically record a person's presence for superior contact tracing, working hard to keep everyone in that country safe. In the United States, curbside pickup among retailers grew from 6.9% of businesses at the end of 2019 to almost 44% of businesses by the summer of 2020. While store owners have historically been slow at adopting new technologies, extraordinary circumstances meant they had to adapt or die. In China, robots screen kindergarten kids to help them safely get back to class, keeping the children entertained along the way.
As you can see, they're putting a little red card on top, which is showing their name, and it's going to bring up their profile. Bless them. They open their little mouths, and it's going to test their hands, their temperature, it's going to test their eyes, and see whether basically they're safe to go in.
And everyone with adequate internet access learned how to work remotely, even if that meant there were sometimes technical challenges on the way.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take
we're trying to, can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you. I think it's a filter.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
Yes, a digital-first path is filled with twists and turns for end users and for businesses. The big tech businesses know this all too well. They started speeding down this road in the late 1990s, waving an unofficial banner with a dangerous message: follow us to move fast and break things. 20 years later, this way of doing business in the technology era must be put to rest. This mantra must fade into obscurity. In fact, let's be frank, we are drowning in technology, but we're starving for a new generation of business leaders to get behind the wheel. The next generation of digital disruption opportunity requires a brand new take on an old way of thinking. If we assume that most leading businesses of tomorrow need to be technology companies today, the business of technology banner needs a rewrite, and perhaps something like this could work. Follow us to move fast and fix things, and bring people, the planet, and purpose along for the ride. After all, today's event is all about building a foundation for a better future, and I'm confident that this can happen. While many business of technology speakers are pessimistic about the future, I'm an optimist, maybe mostly because hope is an incredible antidote for despair. So let's assume that successful leaders of tomorrow must move fast and fix things. So in order to take people along for a ride, a lot has to happen in terms of designing a better way to work. In 2021, the future of work is like a Facebook update in 2010. It's complicated. Whether you want to have your team back in the office, working from home, or doing a little bit of both, their wellness is now your responsibility. Yes, in many industries, remote work is here to stay in one way or another. We also know that remote workers are working longer hours, often well beyond 40 hours a week, and this comes at a cost. Anxiety is affecting about 52% of home workers, and 76% of home workers have had no training at all in terms of how to work well from home. Another serious issue is availability creep, meaning workers have no boundaries anymore in terms of when to shut things down. To borrow a quote from a Forbes writer, the pandemic was all about sickness, and the byproduct is a sense of future wellness. So now you have a couple of challenges ahead. You probably are a technology organization, and you are definitely responsible for your team's well-being. And these are both important responsibilities. If we go back to our discussion on the digital opportunity, we can dissect exactly what this means. From a definition standpoint, an opportunity is a set of circumstances that makes it possible to do something. But this probably isn't a strong enough statement going into 2022. The digital disruption opportunity might be better explained as the digital disruption imperative. In 1999, we talked about opportunities in this space. But today, the need for real change is here. There are few organizations, or even governments for that matter, that will be able to thrive in the future without a major rethink. So think less about the opportunity in front of you and more about the imperative calling you. Now, one of the final questions that needs answering is this: how do you bring everyone along for the ride? What responsibility do leaders have beyond their businesses? For starters, every organization should care deeply about the digital infrastructure divide. There are 7.8 billion people in the world, and a whopping 3.6 billion do not have basic internet access. The digital imperative means bridging this gap. We've been talking about disruption for decades, but it's only recently that we've truly been disrupted. The COVID-19 pandemic forced transformation to happen. And as we move forward toward our post-pandemic recovery, it won't be technology alone that saves us, but it certainly offers up the best tools we have, especially if we can align this technology with better leaders, prepared to face the future with a human-first approach. This means that while the big tech companies of today have broken parts of humanity, democracy, and trust, it's up to all of us to figure out a way to fix it and bring as many people, the planet, and a purpose along for the ride. Thanks so much for having me.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Richard Taylor and I am the CEO and Creative Director of Wētā Workshop in Wellington, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Wētā Workshop is a concept design and manufacturing business for the world's creative industries. It's also an innovation and invention company developing our own content and creations. We are best known for our special makeup effects, props, costumes, creatures, and miniatures for large-scale feature films such as the Middle-earth trilogies, the Avatar movies, or a multitude of other shows. My wife Tanya and I started the company that would become Wētā Workshop over 30 years ago in the back room of our tiny Wellington flat. Wētā Workshop's story is about constant innovation and creative courage, born out of a need to find solutions to meet the challenges that each new project offers and each new year turns up. Even though we'd been working for 10 years preceding LOTR, this trilogy of movies definitely put us on the map. And one of the great offshoots of these films is that it proved that New Zealand could foot it with the heavyweights of Hollywood, and through large-scale filmmaking, New Zealand could stamp its cultural and creative mark indelibly on the world stage. Naturally, whenever you finish any job, you don't want to lose the incredible crew that had gathered around you. If we wanted to continue growing creativity, we would need to stabilize the very bumpy business we were in by diversifying into other areas of interest. Coming out of the back end of Lord of the Rings, I wanted our team to create the high-end figurative collectibles from the films and hoped that Middle-earth fans would love collecting the things that we would go on and make. Our consumer products business was born. We ultimately opened the Wētā Cave, a small but wonderfully unique retail experience where we could sell our collectibles directly to our fans and share a small slice of the workshop story out to the world. Due to the incredible success of the films, Middle-earth fans started turning up in relatively large numbers at our Miramar facilities. Coupled with this was our desire to demystify what we do in the workshop, to try and inspire young New Zealanders to consider doing what we'd been doing for the past decade in the workshop, and so we started a tourism business by building windows into workshop. Now fast forward to 2021 and our consumer products business provides employment to over 40 people. Most special though is that discerning collectors of affordable art are collecting our figures the world over. And pre-COVID, our Wellington Wētā Workshop tours was welcoming tens of thousands of international and domestic tourists every year. Our next adventure was into location-based experiences. When we make costumes, props and physical effects for films, a team can spend months working on something and crafting it in meticulous detail. Authorship of how that work is to be seen is then taken over by the director, who then embellishes that work through how they may use it in their film, sometimes only for a few seconds, and if we're lucky, a minute or two. Creating location-based experiences brings that level of detail and allows us to share it with our audience in a way that they can experience it up close and in full detail for as long as they wish to look at it. Although we had been doing exhibitions and location-based experiences, it wasn't until we got to create Gallipoli, the scale of our war, in collaboration with our friends at Te Papa, our National Museum, that we decided to really focus our effort into diversifying into this area of creativity as well. It was our dream to open our own location-based experience in Auckland, which showcased the talents of the entire workshop and would hopefully inspire our guests into a higher appreciation of the creative arts as used in filmmaking. We opened Wētā Workshop Unleashed in December 2020, pushing ahead despite closed international borders. We want Unleashed to inspire creativity in people of all ages and to just try something new. When Tanya and I started out in our flat 33 years ago, we had no idea where this journey would take us. At times it's been a bumpy ride, but we have managed to navigate Wētā Workshop to come a long way over the decades because we've been able to surround ourselves with people who share our love of creativity and our passion to push the boundaries of what we aspire to do every day. We didn't need to move to Los Angeles to have a global business. Our clients come to Miramar from China, Europe, the USA, the Middle East, and most other corners of the world. So, all going well, we will forge forward with the same heightened excitement for what may lie around the corner, and constantly trying to push the edges of innovation in an attempt to create something new, exciting, and meaningful for our clients, our audiences, and ourselves.
Tēnā koutou. It has already been a very full and engrossing day, and I hope you are enjoying it as much as I am. It is a great privilege for me to introduce our next APEC CEO Summit keynote speaker. I'm told that the name Amal in Arabic means hope, and hope is what Amal Clooney often brings to those she represents and those whose causes she advocates for through her work as an international human rights lawyer. Amal Clooney frequently represents victims of mass atrocities, including those affected by genocide and sexual violence, and she has successfully defended political prisoners and journalists around the world. She has appeared in cases before the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and the European Court of Human Rights. Currently, Ms. Clooney is a special advisor to the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Karim Khan QC, and is a member of the British government's team of experts on preventing sexual violence in conflict zones. She is also one of the UK Attorney General's panel of experts on public international law and has served as deputy chair of a panel of legal experts on media. Previously, she was based in The Hague, working in the Office of the Prosecutor at the UN Special Tribunal for Lebanon and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, where she was judicial assistant to presiding judge Patrick Robinson. Amal is the author of The Right to a Fair Trial in International Law, which was published by Oxford University Press in 2020, and is a visiting professor at Columbia Law School. She is a practicing barrister at Doughty Street Chambers. In addition to all of this, she is also the co-founder and co-president of the Clooney Foundation for Justice, which she founded with her husband George Clooney in 2016. The foundation advocates for justice through accountability for human rights abuses around the world. I am looking forward to hearing about her work defending victims of human rights abuses, her thoughts on protecting human rights in today's digital world, and the important role that business can play in supporting human rights. Please join me in welcoming Amal Clooney to the APEC CEO Summit 2021.
Thank you so much to Prime Minister Ardern for inviting me to speak at this APEC Summit. And kia ora to everyone in New Zealand. It's not easy to say no to a request penned by your Prime Minister, given the great respect and popularity that she enjoys all over the world. So I decided not to even try to resist her invitation. And although unfortunately it wasn't possible for me to come to New Zealand for this, I'm delighted to be able to join you from just next door in beautiful Australia. I have been asked to address how human rights affect businesses in our digital world. And my message is a very simple one. We no longer live in a world where businesses can say human rights are none of our business. It's increasingly difficult for companies to say we're just here to make a profit and bury their heads in the sand. Businesses and big multinational corporations and tech companies in particular are a key part of our multilateral world of decision makers, and each one will decide whether to be a force for good or complicit in abuses of power. The digital nature of our world has, of course, affected the types of human rights abuses that are committed. That's not to say that age-old methods are no longer deployed. All over the world, we still see crimes against humanity committed against minorities, the subjugation of women, the murder of journalists who dare to speak the truth. But autocrats have also innovated to make the most of the digital revolution. For instance, by adopting new laws to police speech on the web, by harassing dissidents using mass surveillance tools and government-sponsored trolls, and silencing communities through shutdowns of the internet. Let's look at an example from an APEC country. My client, Maria Ressa, is a journalist in the Philippines who was a CNN bureau chief for Asia. And like any journalist worth their salt, she reported on misdeeds by her government, including a murderous campaign against alleged drug dealers that has killed thousands of Filipino civilians. I've been talking about Maria for some time, but a lot more people now know about her as she was just awarded this year's Nobel Peace Prize. Yet in the Philippines, this talented journalist faces a 6-year prison sentence for the crime of cyber libel, and the rest of her life in prison following a host of other spurious charges. As a convicted criminal, she may not even be allowed to travel to Oslo to collect her Nobel Prize. And alongside this legal campaign, the government has used online trolls to instigate and amplify disinformation campaigns against her. Hate messages on social media directed at Maria at one point reached a rate of 90 messages per hour, all in an attempt to dehumanize her, cast doubt on her credibility, and break down her spirit. Maria's case is emblematic of how human rights abuses by governments can involve companies and how online and offline assaults can intersect. Oxford University's Internet Institute reports that social media manipulation by political actors is now prevalent in over 80 countries, and that governments are spending millions on private sector so-called cyber troops to drown out other voices on social media. The Facebook campaign by security forces in Myanmar against the Rohingya population has been called the first social media-fueled genocide. In China, video cameras with embedded recognition technology are used to detect faces belonging to the Uyghur population, a group that the US has declared to be victims of genocide. And spyware made by the Israeli software company NSO has reportedly been used in state-sponsored attacks on journalists and activists all over the world, including the assassination of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi by Saudi government agents in Turkey. But just as human rights abuses may be the result of both public and private action, so too are the possible responses to such abuse. In Maria Ressa's case, it is states that have so far stepped up. Many states have condemned the actions of the Philippine authorities. The US Congress has taken steps to impose targeted sanctions, meaning asset freezes and visa bans, on Philippine officials complicit in silencing her and other journalists. And the Philippines' trade preferences under the European Union's GSP Plus scheme are on the line if the country is deemed non-compliant with international treaties, including those that protect freedom of speech. But increasingly, it is companies and not just states that are being called upon to take a stand on human rights. And it is, in my view, increasingly difficult for businesses to ignore such calls for at least two reasons. First, because businesses are increasingly held to account for human rights abuses in court. Let me just give you two examples from cases that I've recently been involved in. In one, I represent victims of ISIS in a case before French courts. Last month, the French Supreme Court held that a company, a French cement manufacturer called Lafarge, could be put on trial for complicity in crimes against humanity after it made multi-million-dollar payments to ISIS while operating a cement plant in ISIS-controlled territory in Syria. This is because the French Supreme Court said, quote, knowingly paying several $1 million to an organization whose sole purpose was criminal suffices to constitute complicity, regardless of whether the party concerned was acting to pursue a commercial activity. In another case, I represented 36 women who were being sexually assaulted and in some cases raped by fellow employees while out picking tea in the fields in Malawi. Although the abuses took place far away from the tea company's corporate headquarters in the UK, we were able to sue the company in a UK court and ultimately to secure a large settlement against the company for the human rights abuses occurring at their overseas facilities. So businesses are more likely to pay attention to human rights if they are to face legal consequences for ignoring them. But they are also increasingly judged on their human rights record in the court of public opinion as well. Employees, advertisers, and clients now routinely expect businesses to be on the right side of human rights issues when it comes to their products, investments, and internal governance. I'm sure many of you can think of recent examples where companies have U-turned on a number of policies and decisions after pressure from these groups. Some businesses see this trend as an opportunity because doing good can be profitable too. Studies suggest, for instance, that 73% of millennials would pay more for a product from a sustainable brand. One of Adidas's best-selling trainers in recent years is one made of recycled ocean plastic. And companies like Chobani that have pledged to recruit 30% of their employees from the refugee community have seen profits soar. Of course, sometimes doing the right thing is a calculated decision to pull away. Kirin Beer eventually pulled its investments linked to the military in Myanmar after the coup in that country. Some companies in the US declared they would no longer sell assault rifles at their shops in the wake of mass shootings in that country. And Microsoft and IBM have said no to selling facial recognition technology until there is appropriate regulation in place. But even in such cases, a short-term loss of profit may well avoid long-term harm to the brand. As one US executive has put it, this is not just about being goody-goody, it's good business. I believe that we can make progress on human rights in the world if liberal democracies use the tools they have to pressure illiberal autocracies, and if companies do what they can to move the needle in the right direction. Like many human rights lawyers, I learned early on in my career that you can't always shame bad actors. Some governments that trample on human rights don't care about bad press. And good governments are not always willing to impose consequences when abuses are committed by others. But if you can't battle evil, you can at least try to tackle apathy. And if you can't rely on liberal governments to solve global issues, you have to try and inspire the private sector to step in. That's what I believe. Indeed, it's sometimes the only option, given that so many global challenges that we face call for a multi-stakeholder response. One example is when New Zealand launched an initiative to police terrorist content on the web after the tragic mosque shooting in Christchurch. It partnered not only with 55 other states, but also with 10 leading tech companies to do this. Scores of companies diverted from their core business to make sanitizer and masks and gowns in the early stages of the COVID pandemic. Airbnb recently offered temporary housing to more Afghan refugees than most Western states have offered to take in as a country. And at the COP26 talks, companies alongside governments were discussing their carbon emissions. So businesses are not only incidental, but often absolutely essential to advance human rights in our interconnected world. We often hear that the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And I think it's true to say that at least in most places in the world, it's better to be a woman, a black person, a gay person, or a minority voice today than it was 100 years ago. But the arc doesn't just bend on its own. Each generation has to have people who bend it. As we say at the Clooney Foundation, we have to wage justice. And I believe we all have a part to play. Thank you very much.
Tēnā koe, nā mihi nui ki a koe. Thank you so much. That is international human rights lawyer Amal Clooney. She is, of course, a fellow at the Columbia Law School Human Rights Institute and the co-founder of the Clooney Foundation for Justice. Some fascinating points to come out of her comments at this year's APEC 2021 Leaders Summit, really touching on a theme of technology being used both for good and for bad. Obviously, throughout the morning, we have plotted the ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has forced a reckoning in our use of technology and accelerated the use of technology both in governments and in individual businesses and firms. And Amal Clooney noting there that both leaders in government and leaders in business have some stark choices to make when it comes to the implementation of technology. It can be a force for good, it can be a force for bad, but actually doing good can be profitable. And I like the way she framed it, right?
How was it? Goody goody.
Yeah, she said, it's not just about being a goody goody. And so often, when we're in these formats, we slip into language that perhaps isn't quite as frank as that is. But it's not just about being a goody good, it's about doing what is good because it's profitable, which, it has always been a fundamental driver for business.
Absolutely, and when this summit is focused on ESG and doing better, and trying to move forward and making people, or, more than profit, the bottom line, I think she has some poignant key points that she's raised, and she came into the summit with the intent to challenge some of our leaders, actually challenge all the leaders and those taking part in this year's summit to reflect on the humanitarian impact of business and to place human rights at the core of decision-making to support global issues. So I think she nailed it.
It's interesting in a consumer perspective how much doing the right thing has become something that consumers clearly value. And I look at the likes of the brand Allbirds, for example, which it was instituted by a former captain of the New Zealand football team.
Good mention.
And listed on the NASDAQ last week and has enjoyed incredible success. But so much of their value proposition with consumers is one that extends beyond just the basic things that we've always put value in, whether it's comfort or affordability or anything like that. It's actually those other ethical concerns, it's the social responsibility, it's climate concerns. Those are the things that are clearly important to consumers, and particularly younger consumers. This is something we've seen everywhere, all over the world. Younger consumers have a different value proposition to ones that many businesses have traditionally focused on. And even though, as Amal Clooney noted, there are some difficult choices for business leaders to make when it comes to the use and application of technologies, like facial recognition technology, for example. Sometimes making cautious, prudent, short-term decisions that don't necessarily have a profit motive but have other values in the social space can actually prove to be profitable in the longer term, because consumers or people using that technology say, you know what, that's a brand that cares more than just cares about more than just making money. That is a brand, a company, a firm that wants to make a better world, and that's something that I value as well.
Yeah, kia ora, Jack. Now, before Amal Clooney gave us that wonderful kōrero, we had Amber Mack, and of course the comments online via the platform. One commenter says the benefits of digital disruption will only come when there is digital capability for all, but that's some way off at present, Jack. Currently, more than 50% of the world's population has no internet devices or access to education. Until we get to grips with digital equity, then we will all be held back.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely relevant, isn't it? If we can put digital tools in the hands of lower income communities, we know that they are very quick to use those digital tools. We know that they're very quick to adapt to the technology, that they're able to see the capacity within the technology, but you actually have to have those tools in their hands in the first place. And if we want to make a more equitable marketplace, we want to make a more equitable world, that's going to be something, I think, for not just for technology companies, but for governments and for business leaders to seriously consider. You know, and not just because, again, we want to do the right thing. But I think one of the things that too often we have underestimated is the market value of those communities. By ensuring that we have equitable access to digital tools within some of those traditionally underserved communities, you open up a market that has previously been disconnected from firms and from companies and from entire sectors of the economy for the entire industrialised age, you know? So as soon as we're able to address those things, not only do you empower those people to build better lives, but you also, once again, add to the capacity to build profit.
Absolutely. It's interesting how things have suddenly turned as a result of the COVID pandemic globally. Another comment, agree with Amber, we're finding the qualities that make great leaders are shifting. We need new types of leaders to enable our digital transformation. That's a good comment. Earlier on, a comment on the economy panel. I hope Bob Morritt's address has made other CEOs question how they can play a better role to achieve a better, greener, fairer and more inclusive future. One last comment I'll read, which is from Jesus Ricardo Domingo on APEC. APEC CEOs, to what extent is there awareness and appreciation of APEC, its work and potential among your organisation's personnel, partners and clients? There's so much potential for APEC to be a uniting and synergising platform for the Asia Pacific, but are we maximising it?
Well, Jesus, that is what today is all about. That is why we are here for the 2021 APEC CEO Summit. Certainly that is a theme that has worked its way through many of the comments this morning, some challenges to our business and government leaders who we know are tuning in from around the APEC economies throughout this year's summit.
Tēnā koe, Jack. Also, if you're joining us on the US broadcast, this is where we leave you for the day, although you are, of course, welcome to stay on. But if you're watching from elsewhere in the APEC region, we will be back with you very shortly.
I think it's amazing that to be able to have the opportunity to put Māori into cartoons that kids are watching, because, you know, I mean, that's what we want at the end of the day. We want them to be seeing characters but hearing it all in our beautiful reo Māori.
To be able to work with people, give them a new tool that allows them to share their stories, to curate their stories, to add value to their stories, whether it's about them or something that they're about to share with the world in a product or a service, is one of the greatest things that we can do for our future generations.
Okay, let's try one. It's quite a tricky one. E hika, kaua he pēra, ke o kaha, he maha ngā ika kei te moana.
Drones are normally loud, which limits their commercial applications. We've created low noise drone technology, which makes them quieter and safer. We've developed aerial audio, which is the world's first two-way audio communication payload for drones. It allows you to capture sound from the sky.
Auckland region is starting to grow up from being a village into a city. There's a lot of green space. We don't have a lot of air pollution. It's a great place to live. The mandate for Auckland Transport is to determine the strategy and deliver and operate transport throughout Auckland.
At Auckland Transport, our vision is to build a digital city through mobile applications, data, websites and other means of communication, how people get from one place to another, whether that's on our assets, that's buses, trains and ferries, or by other means.
Auckland's constrained geographically. It's a long, narrow piece of land with water all around it. So in parts of Auckland, it's less than a kilometre wide. We can't just keep expanding, we have to integrate our modes, and digital allows us to do that.
We collect a lot of information through the social listening and off our transport network. And when you couple that information with other sources like the weather, you can really get some insights into what's going to happen. We have a vision that when you wake up in the morning, you should know what mode of transport what's my best options. If you're catching a ferry home in the evening, we will know if you're likely to catch the bus that's waiting at the other end. I value the partnership with Microsoft because they bring the capability and the depth of experience and support to the company.
Our most important role is to provide an urban environment that people want to live in and allow them to be connected in a way that suits their particular lifestyle.
It's important to me that Auckland Transport is at the cutting edge because not only am I an employee of Auckland Transport, but I'm a citizen and a customer.